When two people fall in love, they rarely imagine the day they'll sit across from each other wondering if this is still worth fighting for. We begin relationships with such optimism, with the belief that love, once found, will simply sustain itself. But love doesn't live on enthusiasm alone. It needs attention, curiosity, and sometimes the courage to look at the uncomfortable truths we'd rather avoid. When you ask if your relationship is worth saving, what you're really asking is whether the person you both become still fits inside the story you once wrote together. Relationships are not static, they evolve, and sometimes they outgrow their original form. The question isn't just can this be saved, but what exactly are we trying to save? Are we saving the connection that still breathes between us, or the memory of what we once were? There are relationships that end not because love has disappeared, but because one or both partners stopped being curious about the other. They forgot that the person beside them is not a fixed entity, but an unfolding story. Intimacy is not the opposite of mystery. It's the art of staying interested even when you think you already know everything. But there are also moments when love itself is no longer nourishing, when what used to feel safe now feels suffocating. You can spend years trying to resuscitate something that no longer wants to live, out of guilt, fear, or habit. That's when the effort to save the relationship becomes an effort to save your own identity, the one tied to being a couple, even when that role no longer fits. To decide whether your relationship is worth saving, you have to confront not only the state of the us, but the state of the you. Are you growing, shrinking, or disappearing within this bond? Is the relationship a place where your best self can breathe, or a space where you've learned to hold your breath? Every relationship is a dance between security and freedom, between togetherness and individuality. Sometimes saving it means rebuilding the bridge, other times it means allowing each person to walk away with grace. The truth is, love doesn't always need to last to be meaningful. What matters is whether, in this chapter, it still calls you to be alive, to be honest, to be awake in the presence of another human being. So when you ask, is it worth saving? Listen closely, not only to your heart, but to the silence between you. It often holds the answer you've both been avoiding. When two people reach the point where they begin asking if their relationship is worth saving, they are already standing in a fragile, tender space between hope and resignation. It is not an easy question, because it implies loss no matter the answer. To save a relationship means confronting the ways it has fallen apart. To let it go means accepting that something once beautiful is no longer alive in the same way. Most of us would prefer not to stand in that space for long. We want a clear answer. Yes or no, stay or go, right or wrong. But relationships rarely offer clarity. They exist in shades of gray, in unfinished sentences, in the quiet age of what might still be possible. Sometimes what we call love is a story we've been telling ourselves for years. One that has become familiar, safe, even comforting in its predictability. We mistake familiarity for connection. We confuse attachment with intimacy. And so, when the relationship begins to falter, our first instinct is to fix it, to restore it to its earlier version. We think of saving as returning to the beginning, as rekindling the spark, as reigniting passion. But perhaps the real work isn't about going back. Perhaps it's about asking whether this relationship can evolve into something that reflects who you both are now rather than who you once were. To decide if something is worth saving, you must look at the relationship not as a single story, but as two intersecting journeys. Who are you now, compared to the person who entered this bond? How have you changed? How has your partner changed? Are you both growing in directions that can still meet, or are you walking parallel lines that never quite touch? Love is not always enough to bridge that distance. It can be full of feeling and still lack alignment. There are moments in every long-term relationship when love becomes quieter, less urgent, less visible. The small gestures, the spontaneous laughter, the effortless touch, these begin to fade beneath the weight of everyday life. Routines replace rituals, and conversations become logistics. When this happens, people often misinterpret the fading intensity as the death of love itself. But sometimes what's gone missing is not love but attention. Desire and connection require a certain curiosity, a willingness to see your partner not as a given, but as someone continually in flux. When you stop being curious, you stop discovering, and when you stop discovering, the relationship becomes static. Still, not every silence is a sign of neglect. Some silences hold depth. They are born of comfort, not disinterest. The challenge is learning to tell the difference. When you sit in the same room without speaking, do you feel peace or distance? Does the quiet feel full or empty? Those subtleties tell you more about the state of your bond than any argument ever could. Often, when people come to the question of whether a relationship is worth saving, they have already spent months, sometimes years, avoiding the deeper truth. They've been patching cracks instead of asking why the foundation feels unstable. They've tried new vacations, new routines, new rules of communication, all in the hope that effort itself will compensate for absence. But love is not a chore to be completed. You cannot will connection back into existence through obligation. What brings two people back to each other is not effort alone, but authenticity, the willingness to meet each other without armor. To truly evaluate whether a relationship should be saved, you must look at the patterns that define it. Is it a place where both people feel seen, or one where one person's needs consistently eclipse the other's? Is it built on reciprocity, or is it sustained by one person's emotional labor? Saving something that repeatedly diminishes you is not love. It is self-betrayal disguised as loyalty. Sometimes what keeps people bound together is not love, but fear of loneliness, fear of change, fear of failure. But a relationship built on fear will always ask you to shrink in order to survive. And yet, there are relationships that can be renewed, even after years of distance. The turning point often comes when both partners stop trying to be right and start trying to be real. When they stop defending their pain and start revealing it. When they understand that intimacy is not built through agreement, but through vulnerability. The courage to say, "This is who I am now. Can you still meet me here?" Saving a relationship is less about fixing and more about redefining. It requires letting go of the fantasy that love should always feel easy. It requires facing the ways you've both contributed to its unraveling, not as an accusation, but as an act of responsibility. You cannot change your partner, but you can change the emotional climate between you by changing how you show up in it. If you have stopped listening, start. If you have stopped touching, reach out. If you have stopped speaking truth, try again. Small gestures can reawaken something dormant, but only if they come from sincerity, not from desperation. There are also moments when saving the relationship means leaving it. It may sound paradoxical, but sometimes the most loving act is to accept that the relationship has reached its natural end. People evolve, and sometimes they evolve apart. The relationship that once gave you safety might now be limiting your growth. The dream that once united you may no longer reflect who you've become. When staying requires silencing yourself, when love has turned into endurance, when affection feels more like duty than desire, that is not a relationship worth saving. It takes immense courage to end something that still carries traces of love. It is easier to leave when there is hatred or betrayal. But when the breakup comes from quiet incompatibility, from the recognition that you no longer make each other feel alive, it can feel almost unbearable. Yet, in that pain lies a form of integrity. The ability to honor what was without forcing it to become something it cannot be. Sometimes, the most profound love stories are the ones that end before they rot. They remind us that love is not measured by its duration, but by its depth. A relationship does not fail because it ends. It fails only if it denies truth. But perhaps you're not yet at that stage. Perhaps there is still warmth in the embers, still laughter waiting to be rediscovered. Then the question becomes, what would it take to rebuild trust, to reawaken desire, to return to connection? And here the answer often lies not in grand gestures, but in subtle shifts. Start by listening, not to respond, but to understand. When your partner speaks, resist the urge to defend. Instead, try to imagine what it feels like to be them. Replace judgment with curiosity. Ask not, why are you like this? But, what is happening beneath this reaction? Intimacy thrives on empathy. It begins with the willingness to see your partner's vulnerability without trying to fix it. Too often, we turn our partner's pain into an inconvenience rather than an invitation. But when someone shares their hurt, they are not asking for solutions. They are asking to be witnessed. Saving a relationship also means reintroducing playfulness, that forgotten language of connection. Many couples become so focused on resolving conflict that they forget how to enjoy each other. Desire doesn't vanish because of time alone. It disappears when we stop bringing imagination into the relationship. The people who sustain long, lasting bonds are not those who avoid conflict, but those who know how to revive vitality. They flirt, they surprise, they cultivate mystery. They understand that love is both comfort and adventure. At times, the work of saving a relationship involves confronting the ghosts that each person brings from their past. The unhealed wounds, the inherited fears, the learned scripts of love and rejection. Every relationship is an echo of those earlier attachments. When you find yourself repeating patterns, choosing distance, withdrawing, pleasing, or controlling, it's often a sign that the issue is not only between you, but within you. Healing the relationship requires healing the self. But be careful not to confuse growth with perfection. No relationship is without flaws, and no partner is without contradictions. The fantasy of a flawless love often destroys more relationships than imperfection ever could. To love someone truly is to make peace with their humanness, to see both their beauty and their limitations without demanding constant transformation. The art lies in discerning whether those limitations are tolerable or whether they violate something essential to your sense of self. Sometimes the relationship is not broken, it's simply tired. It has been stretched by years of unspoken resentment, neglected affection, or mismatched priorities. In such cases, the question is not whether it's worth saving, but whether both people are still willing to try. Because saving requires two active participants. You can't resuscitate something alone. A one-sided rescue is not love, it's survival. To rebuild, both must choose vulnerability over pride, honesty over comfort. There must be a shared commitment, not just to staying together, but to creating a relationship that feels alive. That means naming the disconnection, sitting through the discomfort, and deciding together what kind of love you still want to create. And then there is forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that releases you from its constant repetition. Forgiveness is a declaration that the relationship matters more than the pain that once defined it. It is saying, I choose to see who you are now, not just who you were when you hurt me. Without forgiveness, love suffocates under the weight of memory. But forgiveness cannot exist without accountability. To forgive is not to excuse, and to save a relationship is not to accept everything. Love is not unconditional tolerance. It is a choice that must coexist with boundaries. Saving a relationship worth saving requires both tenderness and truth. So, is your relationship worth saving? You can only answer that when you have looked at it honestly, without nostalgia, without fear. When you have listened not only to what your heart wants, but also to what your life needs. Some relationships are worth fighting for because they still have room to grow. Others are worth releasing because they have completed their purpose. In the end, the question may not be whether the relationship is worth saving, but whether you are both willing to be reborn inside it. To create a love that matches who you are now, not who you used to be. And love is not a possession, it is a living dialogue. It asks you to keep showing up again and again, not because you must, but because you choose to. If you can still choose each other, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity and desire, then yes, it may be worth saving. But if choosing each other means abandoning yourself, then perhaps what needs saving is not the relationship, but you. So in the end, saving a relationship is not about clinging to what was. It's about choosing, with open eyes, what still can be. Love that endures is not the one that never falters, but the one that dares to grow, to change, to begin again even after breaking. If the relationship calls you both to become more honest, more alive, more compassionate, then fight for it. But if it asks you to disappear, to silence your truth just to keep the peace, then the most loving act may be to let it go. Because love is never proven by how tightly you hold on, but by how courageously you choose what sets both hearts free.